I want to welcome our audience to this L.E.A.R.N podcast. It is in these podcasts that L.E.A.R.N wants you to meet experts that can help you in your work as school leaders or perhaps partners in the education landscape. The topic for the podcast is technology tools, and our guest is CEO for True North Consulting Company, Russ Johnson. On the L.E.A.R.N website, you will find on the research page, under the COE of Safety and the element of technology tools, research in this area being discussed, along with the potential resources to access. Russ, I want to welcome you to the L.E.A.R.N podcast. It's good to have you here to speak with us about this important topic. I know that you have an extensive research and work background in the area of technology tools. Would you please share with the audience some of that background and experience?
Sure. First off, thank you for having me on this podcast. Excited to be a part of this and excited to be here. As you know, Dr. V, for me, school safety is both personal and professional. And I'll be as brief as I can, but I'm married to an elementary school principal, lifelong educator. Between us, we've got 7 daughters that have all gone through public education. We've got one left to leave the nest. And so, in the Johnson household, public education really is the center of kind of our world. I sit on the school board for our hometown district. And so school safety, as it should be for all of us, it really is personal. Professionally speaking, I'm CEO for True North Consulting Group, but prior to doing this, I owned a local regional technology integrator and worked with hundreds of school districts around Texas, and really focused on trying to help districts make good technology decisions. And I'm kind of the old guy in the room when it comes to technology. But as you start to as you work in this industry for a long time, you start to see these other priorities as you kind of mature on your own professional journey. And about 10 years ago, I realized that there are plenty of places districts can go if they just want to buy, a bunch of cameras. But there are very few places for districts to really tap someone on the shoulder and say, help us make sure that we're doing this right, that we're making good decisions, that we're thinking along the lines of more than just how many cameras do I need. And so, the realization, kind of sparked that idea about 10 years ago, and that's how True North was born. And for us, it's not, these aren't technology problems. These are people problems. These are operational problems, implementation problems, funding problems even. And technology absolutely can help. But we have to first understand the problem and develop ideas and really align these decisions with, a long-range strategy.
Right. And of course, you have a great deal of experience in that, and you've just expressed some of that. And you also kind of segued into my question quite nicely, and that is, there's a ton of research out there. Some of it's hard to follow as district leaders, but there's a lot out there. We can't cover it all in this podcast today. But I'd like you to share with the audience some kind of key takeaways about the research that's out there. You kind of touched a little bit on it in the introduction, but touch a little bit on those key points that you think are really important for district leaders and perhaps partners to understand.
Yeah, so school safety is a complex problem. I like to share with school leaders and superintendents that, unfortunately, this is not one of those problems that you can just buy your way out of it. Like I said earlier, it's a people problem. It's interesting. We can put in the best access control system in the world, and a simple stick or a rock, can bypass those investments. I also like to remind people that, no two campuses or facilities are the same. Even for those fast growth districts where you're building multiple elementary schools and maybe it's the same footprint, we've got to be mindful of, there's different students in the school, there's different staff in the school, it's in a different neighborhood, it's surrounded by different environments. And so we can't just copy, paste, rinse and repeat what we're doing at one school. Also, before we're spending money, and I kind of mentioned this, we really need to make sure that we identify and clearly understand what the problems are at that campus. And I know there's a lot of pressure on school districts and on superintendents, especially after an event occurs, because the expectation is, what are you doing about this? What are you doing to prevent this from happening to us? And so we've got to temper those pressures and not let it change our strategy of being purposeful and intentional with the decision making, that's occurring. And it's not something that's just overnight. It does take time, and it does cost a lot of money. But effective security is balanced across three domains. You've got the human factor, you've got the physical measures, and you've got the security technologies. And usually what we see is that the security technologies and the physical measures, I can go pass a bond and I can remedy those, maybe not quickly, but I can create an opportunity to remedy those. That human factor, that's the toughest, messiest, most complex element of this. And so when you look at like a Venn diagram, that's usually the smallest piece that gets emphasized because it's the hardest.
Right. So in that research, as you look at that, I'm certain you're going to talk to this in a second. I guess districts tend to ignore that part of the research and focus on those technology tools because that's concrete and it's easy to communicate to their public. What does your experience in the research tell us about that human piece? What is it that is involved there?
Yeah, so it's interesting. There's all sorts of research out there and all sorts of statistics out there. And as you know, you can find a statistic to prove just about anything that you want to prove. But what I think is undisputed is the fact that when there is an active shooter event, that 70% of the time, upwards to 80% of the time, these were, it's hard to say this, well thought out plans. I mean, it's almost like a paradox to say that, but these were organized and they were thought out and they were planned. And oftentimes these were even communicated. And research also shows that leading up to the event, that there's 4 or 5 different indicators that something's not right with this individual. And so research shows us that we can get in front of this, or we have an opportunity to intervene in those situations where someone's struggling or someone's going through a difficult time. But again, that's the messiest part. That's the part that we really have to invest more in, alongside the cameras and the doors and the mass notification and panic buttons and all those things. We just have to make sure that we get this thing balanced.
Right. That makes good sense. And, in your experience as you try to engage districts in this work, there are both impediments to the work, that are always going to be there, barriers to the work, but there's also opportunities, positives. What would you say the positives are that superintendent or the district team can communicate internally and externally to work as they move forward to try to make their campuses more secure, especially in the context of this human piece you're talking about?
Sure. So first and foremost, and I always refer to kind of that bond program and the preparation that leads up to that, because so many districts have been through this. And so just like you would bring in an architect, or some other organization to do a facility study, we need to be taking that same approach when it comes to school safety and bringing in someone that can help measure where we are today, figure out where it is that we're trying to get to, and what it's going to cost and what it's going to take to get there, and help create an organized, aligned security plan that coincides with construction, coincides with growth, or maybe it stands alone for some districts that's where they need to invest the most. But the stakes are too high for us to not look at this problem holistically. And so again, step one is you got to figure out where you are, and you cannot focus on just the facility or just the technology. Even though you can't pass a bond and maybe use those dollars for the human factor, I can pass a bond and remedy those capital expenses so that I free up M&O to pour into that human factor.
That's a good point.
But again, it's get a starting point. Know where you are when you're at the starting line.
And Russ, it occurs to me that creates a lot of transparency. with your community and with your external community, excuse me, and your internal as well. It creates that transparency. That's a wonderful opportunity, frankly, and engages your community and trust with you more. Now, even as you do that, though, there are barriers. And what have you seen in your experience that those implementation barriers are that district leaders need to be aware of as they go into work around safety and security?
Yeah, and so I want to answer that, but I'm afraid I may not have answered or addressed that community piece, and it just dawned on me. So, I was on Facebook scrolling one morning and noticed that someone, had taken a picture of a door that had a chair on it that was propped open, because we know that, during drop-off, they're like ants. They go in, every hole that they can find, right? And
Right.
Who knows who put that chair there? But when I saw it on Facebook, and I have to temper my responses, but what I wanted to say is, rather than take a picture, why don't we as parents, as neighbors, as community members, we have got to plug in and connect more with our schools. And if you see that sort of thing happening, we need to be stepping up and offering our time and our resources during those drop-off pickup times, joining watchdog type programs, because this is not a school problem. This is a community problem. This is a societal problem. And it's going to take people outside of the world of education to connect and engage to help solve this, because we have got to be, this has got to be a team sport effort. So going back to the question that you asked, though, when you're talking about those barriers, the one, especially on the heels of an incident like Rob, that expectation that's placed on the superintendent and the school board and those the leaders, and not even just from our community. I mean, we've seen the state. The state got really active, and I mean, we saw some things come down from the state, and we know that there's going to be more coming down from the state. And so we can't just take what limited resources we have, because we've got to have a headline that says local school district hires 10 SROs, or local school district puts in metal detectors. That's good stuff, but we've got to resist the pressure and the temptation to shortchange the process. The other thing that we have to avoid is knowing that the other big challenges are those human behaviors, and I've been that parent. I'll work in K-12, and sometimes I'll show up at my kid's school, and it's like, oh, I'm safe because I work in this industry, so you should let me roam the halls, or I shouldn't have to have a sticker on because you know me. And so we really have to start adjusting that mindset to where I have to follow the same process as someone that has only been living in the community for a day. We also have to establish these behavioral changes, even with students. I mean, we ingrain into our kids how to be respectful young adults to adults. And so I've had students see me standing outside the door, open the door to let me in, and we've seen teachers out of necessity break protocol by propping open doors because the protocol doesn't fit the workflow. And so it's a false sense of security if we create a protocol, but it doesn't work. Because if that process doesn't work for a teacher or any human, they're going to work around the system. And so, again, going back to every school is unique. We've got to make sure that whatever school safety plan and protocols and processes we establish for a school, that it's workable. We need to be listening to our teachers and find out, are we doing something that's not workable, so that we're not encouraging that sort of thing. And then the last thing is the cost. And this is where the community plays a large role in this, because we can pass a bond and drastically improve two of the three areas that we need to improve in. And so we've got to be engaging the community. And I know it's hard, and I know parents are busy, but somehow we've got to figure out, how do we reach them? What's the hook? How do we evangelize the needs that we have so that parents and community members are lining up at the polls to vote yes to pass a bond, because that's the only way that in a short amount of time, we can make the most amount of improvements. It takes money, and it takes a lot of money. And a lot of schools in the state of Texas are old.
Yeah, they are. And you've worked in those schools. And I'd like to segue to the next question with that. It's like, if you wouldn't mind, highlight some districts that are doing really remarkable work in this area, and perhaps share with the audience how this has impacted those schools.
Sure. And so I know that for every school district across the state, school safety is a priority. And schools care. And before Rob, they cared. Before Sandy Hook, they cared. And so I want to make sure to dispel that, especially since we're having all these conversations, that the only reason we're having all these conversations is because of what happened. We've always been talking about this, but we also know that we've got to pull the curtains back a little bit and be more forthright and more engaging in our conversations with various stakeholders. And so, after prefacing that, there's, one district comes to mind, Roy City ISD. They are Mr. Worthy, the superintendent there, and from his board to his cabinet to his teachers, they've created this culture of relationships. They are a capturing kids' hearts district. And so, this flies maybe in the face of what we may think of as school safety, but it really is foundational, because we have to reach these kids, we have to reach our staff, and we've got to pour into them. Most of the school violent incidents that happens, these aren't people coming from, across the state to inflict harm. These are kids or adults in our community. And so we first have to show that we care about them and we love them. And I think Roy City is one of those districts that really gets that well. But also from a partnership perspective, and Mr. Worthy, I've heard him speak about this on a number of occasions, but building relationships with city managers and with the mayors. His district is in two different cities, but also putting things into place that encourages local PD to want to be at the school. They've got dedicated parking spaces right up front. They've got an office area that is set aside for police officers, offer them coffee, offer them food. They can come and eat at the schools. They invite them to school events. They're trying to create this environment where, law enforcement thinks first of Roy City schools when they're looking for a place to go or a place to land. And, we can't stress that relationship and that level of partnership that we've got to have outside of the district at churches and law enforcement and cities and other agencies, because, again, it's a team sport. And then briefly, I'll mention Carrollton Farmers Branch. So when their new superintendent at the time, Dr. Chapman, came into Carrollton Farmers Branch, he was very pointed in that, at the time they didn't have a police department. And so he wanted to create a police department, but he knew that before we started making these big changes that, again, we really need to figure out, is that the right thing to do as step one? And so he was one of those, or they were one of those districts that did this holistic, comprehensive security risk assessment, which gave them this roadmap and said, all right, well, we need to do some of these other things first. But one of the things that has kind of continued, over the various years and bonds, since this first began, their chief operations officer, Malcolm, he's really carried that torch. And I love hearing him when he talks about, okay, so if we have to buy a portable for growth or for capacity, we're going to put the same level of safeguards and protections into a portable as we do a brand new high school that we build, because this is a non-negotiable for us. And if we don't want to have a portable, or we don't want to invest in that portable, then we need to invest in, expanding our schools or building new schools. And so just, I really respect digging your heels in and not compromising on security just because you have to have a temporary solution.
Right. Well, thank you for sharing that. And those are two good districts. If any partner is interested in talking to those superintendents, I know they'd be more than happy to talk to them or to others. But if a district or partner were interested in exploring more in this work, how would they go about contacting you specifically, Russ?
Sure. So, part of our job is to help, spread the gospel, so to speak. So you can check us out on our website, tncg.com, Google True North Consulting Group, Google Russ Johnson. You can track me down easily. But my email address is russ.johnson@tncg.com. But I promise, pop me into Google, you'll find me, and I'd love to have conversations with anyone that's interested and willing to listen to me.
All right. Well, thank you, Russ, for being a part of the important work of supporting our students in schools. And thank you for participating in a L.E.A.R.N. podcast.
Thank you for having me. Thanks, Dr. V.
Absolutely. Bye-bye.